The moods turned sour in Madrid, with riot police charging out of their fortified positions around the Spanish parliament and plowing into a vast crowd of protesters. Flocking to the capital from all across Spain, tens of thousands of demonstrators have joined a rally to express their anger with the government. Now let's go to RT's Jacob Greaves, who's at the scene with more on this. Jacob, good to see you there. Now, some brutal scenes we're seeing in Madrid. Bring us up to speed on what's happening there right now.
Well, sure, in the last hour and a half or so, the situation here has really worsened somewhat. Now, we saw the front line of demonstrators clashing with police. There were some injuries involved there. After an ambulance had to fight its way through this amassed crowd, we saw someone being taken away on a stretcher. We've also seen protesters pelting police with objects as well. And really, we got an impression of some of the panic felt by those demonstrators as police pushed them back. There are thousands of people here hemmed into a very small space, and when they're being pushed back, they've got nowhere to go. Now, this is all in aid of the so-called Occupy Congress movement, and we've spoken to organisers throughout the course of today, and they say the aim wasn't to actually occupy physically the parliament itself, but what they do want to do is they want to send their message, make sure it's heard by those MPs inside parliament. That is anti-austerity and anti some of the cuts. Now, we're joined at the moment by Carlos Declas, he's a sociologist. Now, the situation behind us at the moment, again, it's looking pretty precarious. Is this worth it to try and get this message across?
Well, I think actually that's the question of whether or not this is worth it is a question for the government and for the troika of the European Union. What you're seeing out here right now is the Spanish and, by extension, the European citizenry reacting against austerity. Now, austerity right now is at a level where it's affecting people's daily lives. It's affecting whether or not people can get medical attention. It's affecting whether or not people can advance socially through education and social progress. What you're seeing is a country where an entire generation is being relegated to a class of immigrants, people that have been invested in with public money to be educated are now going to move out and generate wealth in other countries. That's not a project for a country. Meanwhile, child poverty in Spain has increased exponentially.
Just to stop you there, what can the government do right now to stop this sort of anger?
I think the first thing that the government can do is call for a referendum on paying back the debt and on the constitutional amendment that they made. It's no mistake that these people are gathered here today to talk about the Constitution of Spain, a constitution that has been around since the transition from the Francoist government and was always said that it couldn't be touched, that it was the basis for what Spain is today. But they did change it without a referendum or even consulting citizenry or submitting it to public debate to pay back an illegitimate debt taken on by the private sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. I was going to have to stop you there. Now, as this protest continues, some of the anger's being built up by the jobless rate. You're looking at unemployment in this country, the highest in the Eurozone, about 25% of the population. That's particularly hitting the young, those aged below 25, and we're seeing them really out in force here at the moment today. And we are hearing at the moment that potentially there will be an announcement on the budget for next year being announced later this week, and there may actually be a stop when it comes to any more cuts to healthcare, to education, those that have really riled a lot of public anger in the last couple of months.
Right, thank you for that. Jacob Greaves, who's in Madrid right now, our RT correspondent, giving us the latest on what's happening on the ground in Madrid. Now, among the protesters' demands are the complete halt to austerity and the dissolution of parliament. But journalist and author Miguel Angel Murado says for that to happen, the indignants need a clear objective.
The same indignados or indignant movement, which a year and a half ago was very successful in bringing out in the streets tens of thousands of people, and not exactly against something very specific, but against the way in which politics are done, the lack of transparency, the lack of democracy, the fact that important decisions are not consulted with the people. I said they had a huge success, but it was short-lived. It fizzled out very quickly. practically because their demands were too huge, were too vague also. There will be people, undoubtedly, probably thousands of people. So yes, there's anger, there's resentment against the government. The Spanish government is trying to resist that because they know it's unpopular, but I'm afraid they will probably bow to the dictates of Brussels once again, and we will have more maybe tax raises and all that sort of thing.
Right, just to remind you, if you've just joined us, people from across Spain traveled to the capital for today's demonstrations to show their anger against the government's handling of the financial crisis. Thousands of protesters from across Spain have surrounded the country's parliament, chanting and jeering at passing deputies. They're voicing their anger against the government's anti-crisis policies, namely drastic cuts and a soaring jobless rate. Among people's demands are a complete halt to austerity and the dissolution of parliament. Now, just to remind you, these are live pictures from Madrid. The protest has been tagged Occupy Congress. Now, those pictures you're looking at just from a few minutes ago, where clashes had already broken out with protesters and the police, who are heavily armored, using batons and even making some arrests. At least 1,300 police are on duty at the Congress building right now. Now, Spain has, of course, seen the worst unemployment rate in the Eurozone, and the Spanish government is having to borrow heavily to cope with the effect of a recession and, of course, a collapsed property value. And people are feeling the heat. They're saying no more to these austerity measures.